Welcome to Discover You, an inspiring podcast exploring cutting-edge solutions to our everyday psychological challenges. We explore complex mental health issues and talk to professionals, experts, and renowned authorities at the forefront of transformative healing. Our mission is to educate and destigmatize, and to ultimately view mental health as a proactive quest for optimized living and equilibrium, rather than mere crisis intervention.
Hello and welcome to Montare Media Discover You podcast. I'm Renee Baribeau, Marketing and Outreach Manager for Montare Behavioral Health. Our guest today is Michael Gellert, a Jungian psychoanalyst practicing in Los Angeles and Pasadena. He has a broad knowledge of and interest in the intersection of spirituality and psychology, having been educated in Rabbinic Judaism, pursued religious study in college, and trained with a renowned Zen master in Japan. Michael has served as a mental health consultant for USC and Time magazine. He is also a prolific award-winning author. His books include Modern Mysticism, The Way of Small, America Identity Crisis, and The Divine Mind, the latter two receiving a Nautilus Book Award. His new book, Far From This Land, a memoir about evolution, love, and the afterlife, will be published on June 1st and is available for pre-order. Welcome, Michael. I'm really excited to talk to you and have this very integrated conversation, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us, I'm very curious to find out, what is the inspiration for your new book?
Well, the inspiration is generated by my experience having brain surgery and the period after coming to terms with some of the questions that came up for me. The typical ones one would expect, the questions about our mortality and does consciousness survive our day-to-day existence. With the actual surgery itself, as anybody knows who's had anesthesia for surgery, you are put out into sleep, and you wake up a minute later, and it seems like no time has passed. It is such a deep state of consciousness that it actually seems annihilated, which is the purpose of the anesthesia, so you remember nothing. That raised for me a number of questions about the nature of consciousness as well. And the book is basically an exploration of that encounter with nothingness, which science will tell us is the same condition that we go to when we die. And I wanted to understand better the connections between all these things. And that's how the book came about.
Very interesting. And as a Jungian psychologist, did this change the way you believed or the way you thought? Or how did you started in a rabbinical school and then you went into more spiritual sciences? How did all of this weave together for you after this? Was it a near-death experience, or how do you refer to that?
It was a kind of a near-death experience. It really was more a near-death exploration. But to answer your question, things came together. And in fact, each of the things you mentioned, including my Jungian training, deepened from this experience and confirmed things for me that before I either was questioning or simply not having any deep thoughts about. Death has always been something that has been around me. I grew up the child of Holocaust survivors, but actually the experience that happened post-brain surgery and the work I did on all these different questions confirmed things for me in a more solid way.
Would you tell our listeners what makes something more Jungian psychology-based as opposed to some of the, the cognitive behavioral therapies and things like that? What would be the difference from someone coming to see you?
Well, the Jungian approach aspires toward bringing the person to a sense of wholeness. That means integrating our different parts, integrating our unconscious side we don't see, the shadow, integrating the meanings we derive from our dreams. Jungian psychology does a lot of work with dreams. It aims for wholeness, whereas by contrast, Freudian psychology, the traditional one, not so much the revised new psychoanalysis that we hear about and read about today, but the original works of Freud basically treated the unconscious as something derived from our conscious experience. And when we dream of it, when we dream of something, whatever we dream of, it is believed to be something that's went into the unconscious through our conscious experience at some point. Jungian psychology tries to tap into the collective unconscious, which is a belief that there's a layer in the psyche that we all inherit, and we also inherit certain predispositions, and those are the dispositions that Jung called the archetypes. The main difference is with the emphasis on wholeness, it departs from Freud's view of the primary sexual nature of the psyche. Freud was very interested in our sexuality, and another student of Freud's, Adler, was particularly interested in the power principle, his concept of the inferiority complex. This is all about our self-empowerment and confidence. All these are important as well in Jungian psychology, but Jungian psychology has a particular religious or spiritual orientation because of that aspiration toward wholeness and because of the religious nature of the unconscious. When we take a dream and we dig a little deeper, we often find that below the everyday associations, there's an archetype or a mythological meaning. And that can inform how we understand the dream and what the dream is trying to tell us about ourselves.
I wonder if Freud was having a projection. That was funny.
Onto? What do you imagine he'd be projecting onto?
Well, just, what would he
be projecting is a better question.
Maybe his own untapped sexuality. Who knows? It's hard to know from here. So how, after this exploration of the death and this, I'm assuming when you had this experience, you tapped into the archetypes that go the more the conscious collective archetypes. Would that be fair to say? How did that change how you treated people who came to you with mental health issues?
The approach that I took working on this material is not so different than the approach I recommend to patients. The main way I wrote the book was through exercises known as active imagination. Now, active imagination is very simply when you have a dream and then you wake up and you recollect it, you carry on the dream from where it ended. You do that with your conscious willpower and awareness. You don't force it. You relax into a kind of meditation, a kind of relaxed state, and you invite the dream to continue where it left off, because most dreams are incomplete. They're certainly incomplete until we get their meanings. So we could have a dialogue, for example, if we dreamt of a certain person in the dream whom we don't know in waking life. That would be an ideal person to have a conversation with and ask that person. And this is a written kind of meditation. People tend to write it down. What are you doing in my dream? Or what do you know about this dream that I don't know? Or what do you know and have to say about me or this problem I'm wrestling with that I'm not aware of? In other words, you dream the dream on and you allow the unconscious to take on a life of its own. Now, when patients come and share a dream, the analyst would perhaps suggest to them when they go home is to do a series of these dialogues with any character in their dream that they wish to contact and learn from. Now, actually, Jung named this active imagination, but he himself knew that he didn't invent it. This is a method of visioning or of inducing visions that goes all the way back to the ancients. The ancient Greeks knew this method, and a lot of people through the centuries have used it as a form of exploration. Some of the great poets like Dante and Goethe, they used it. Scientists actually have used it too, whether they knew it or not. Einstein's visioning that led to the theory of relativity could be called active imagination. So this is immensely helpful to people because firstly, it empowers the patient as being a partner with the analyst in their exploration and puts both of them on a viewpoint that there's a third other, which is the unconscious of the patient. So there's the analyst, there's the patient, and there's the patient's unconscious. And then, of course, the analyst's unconscious comes in. So you actually have a very rich session with at least 4 people in it.
I know you asked about to see my background a little, so I think you know that I come from a shamanic background. We're both Nautilus award-winning authors, so I kind of liked that mix there. Is there a difference between the active dreaming, the active imagination that you're talking about, and shamanic journeying?
Not much, if there is. Shamans regularly engage with power animals and totem animals and forces of nature. They look inward. They try to understand the name of a demon, for example. You know, in the old days, not just in shamanism, but universally, tribal cultures and most cultures right up until the era of science looked at mental states that we today would call anxiety or depression-based, and they would say, well, there's a demon here. And the shaman would try to find out the name of the demon so as to be able to communicate with it. And the person who goes to the shaman with this possession or demonic problem is just the ancient version of people going to the analyst today, who uses a more scientifically rational approach, but integrating the mysteries of the unconscious and the powers of it, of the unconscious. So it's really just a modern version of what the shamans do.
That's interesting. There's right now after this period of COVID and people have been really isolated and locked away for a year. How do you think what effect do you think that that's having on mental health and well-being and the psyche? And are we dreaming a new collective dream, or what are you experiencing with this kind of really rapid transformation in how we're living our lives at the moment?
Well, of course, there's all the everyday things that affect us. And most of us who've been communicating in work through Skype or Zoom are at this point, after a year now, we're getting cabin fever. Even the most introverted people are getting cabin fever. The extroverted types, we're getting it a lot sooner because they really are oriented toward being out there in the world. But clearly this episode is an unusual one in history. There have been pandemics before, deadly ones, and this has certainly become a very deadly pandemic. The one thing I could say that is interesting and that comes up very subtly, it's not always overt, It's what Jung and one of Jung's students who became a writer himself, Edward Edinger, it's what both of them would call the apocalypse archetype. So, although this is not likely to lead to a literal apocalypse the way the Bible portrays the apocalypse, it touches upon psychic nerve endings deep down inside of us that have apocalyptic characteristics. The feeling that our lives are changing or coming to an end, or the life as we knew it is coming to an end, is one of the features of the apocalypse archetype. Another one is that because we're introverting so much and needing to draw upon our psyches and the resources of our psyches for our well-being, it brings up a different aspect of our selfhood. Actually, what this pandemic is doing, it's forcing people to go inwards. And the ones who are having the most trouble are the ones who are having trouble going inwards. But when we go inwards, we begin to tap into the parts of the psyche that we've never explored. So those deep aspects of our selfhood are now becoming more available. And that could be looked at as the positive lining, the silver lining of the cloud. There's no way to make good sense out of why so many people have died or had to die. We could have handled this a lot better. But in any case, it's bringing up things in people that maybe down the road we're going to appreciate them more. Those things that it brings up about our psychic capacities, our tolerance, our search for meaning and for insight.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I also have been thinking a lot about all of the good that's come out of this. All of the families that have gotten to spend more time together, all of the parents who had to educate their children because, they were dropping kids at school. They weren't really, I'll be curious to see how this next evolution of psychology translates when they're all old enough to go to therapy, or will they need it because they've had a better foundational upbringing by being closer to their family at that one moment in time. It'll be a curious study, don't you think?
Yeah. For those who are having parents who are also able to make the most of it, because, a lot of these parents you see on the news who are arguing to open the schools earlier are feeling the pressures of having 3-4 kids at home all day long, whom they've got to keep busy and keep connected to the internet so they can do their schooling. And you know how kids are. They don't always want to do that. So we see every possible human reaction in this pandemic. We see anxiety, we see depression, we see claustrophobia, we see just fear of the unknown. It will be very interesting to see how all this plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us what inspired your new book. I mean, you told us a little bit about you had brain surgery, and tell us about your new book. And I think there's an aspect of creativity that came out of it for you, as well as what you're hoping people will gain from this next book of yours.
Well, the book is very much a series of dreams and active imaginations that I had on those dreams that came shortly after the brain surgery. One of the characters who came up was clearly an inner skeptic. He's the skeptic within me, and we all have a skeptic within us. Some people have it more developed than others. People who are fully skeptical in their religious belief systems don't have to go into the unconscious to dig up that part. It's available to them. But those of us who are exploring comparative religion and spirituality and yoga and alchemy and all those things, we're already more easily connected to the figures in our dreams because we're more inner-oriented. The inner figure who came up for me was this inner skeptic. There's a part of me that reads science and loves science and takes it seriously. In the Jungian school, there's an openness to shamanism, which we talked about before, and religion and alchemy and all the different world traditions Jung was interested in, and he wrote about almost all of them. But he always stressed the importance of keeping the ego alert and strong and being open to science. We could even say science is a kind of mythology or religion of its own, but one that's rational and based on the scientific method. The inner skeptic in me came up pretty early in the active imagination process and actually stole the show. He insisted on telling the story of what I was going through his eyes. And then the book became a dialogue between me and the inner skeptic. And from beginning to end, it's basically an exploration of the different skeptical responses we've had towards near-death experiences, toward the existence or possible existence of an afterlife, toward the possibility of having contact with the deceased, our deceased loved ones. There's a lot more of that going on in people's lives than science and psychology in particular have paid attention to. So the book is very much an exploration of these un or less explored parts of psychology.
And as I hear you, I can tell that that inner skeptic came out because, you sound like a man of science when I hear you speak. And what did that do to your religious leaning? So you started in your faith was Judaism and your parents were Holocaust survivors. And then you, it looks like you studied with a Zen Buddhist master. Where did you end up? Is there a God? Did you find that for yourself, or where are you now on that scale?
Well, that's a bit of an arc to kind of fill in all the different stages of my life from childhood to adulthood. I think what I can say about that is that I've been interested in mysticism since I was 15 years old. My rabbi, who I trained with, the rabbis took me through the Bible and into the Talmud, which is the first Jewish scripture that comes after the Hebrew Bible. It's around the same time that the New Testament came on the scene. The Talmud was already being written down. Those two parts of Western religion, and it's in every Western religion, it's also in Christianity and Islam, they don't get into mysticism as we know it today until about the 15th or 16th century. And they don't blossom. The mysticism doesn't peak at its height until the 17th and 18th centuries. So from the 13th century to the 18th century, you find that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all moved into an area of the psyche which we didn't even know for the large part existed. That has been something I've been fascinated in since I was 15, since I was a teenager. I traveled in India for a year. I studied with yogis there. As you mentioned, I had a Zen teacher where I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I trained in Zen. It wasn't always easy because my teacher didn't speak great English and I didn't speak great Japanese, but Zen is anyways not crazy about a lot of words. Your question about how does that come together with the science, I have never found a huge contradiction between science and religion. They're both exploring the unknown, but in different ways. And what the book very much does is it tries to facilitate a dialogue between mysticism and science, and to show that they're really two sides of the same thing. Today, for example, with near-death experiences, even the most staunch scientific doctors, and the few I've spoken to who've had patients telling them about their near-death experiences, at a certain point they have to raise their eyebrows and say, "We have no explanation for that." But that's not alien to science. The Big Bang theory is a theory. There seems to be some real evidence for it, but we don't know what happened before the Big Bang, and we don't have any understanding of how the entire cosmos, which is infinite, was contained in a neutron or a molecular particle that was the size of a marble. How the whole universe was in a marble, and that exploded, became the cosmos. So I think it was St. Augustine who said that miracles are not contrary to the laws of nature. They're only contrary to what we think are the laws of nature. So at a certain point, we have to take a leap from rational thought into the intuitive realm. Active imagination and our dreams are a good avenue for that. And there we find ourselves coming closer to the scientists, because the mystics did not have the same views of the afterlife that traditional religion did. They had a more logical understanding of it. So the two do come together, and I have a feeling as time goes on, they will increasingly dialogue, and there will be more shared in common between them.
Absolutely. I believe that they have to, because, since 1950, or like for the last 50 years, people have been pulling away from, the churches. And so whatever we opened up in the 15th century no longer works for us today, because it's clear by the next generation of youngsters that they're not buying into that. So who do you tend to see in your office? Who are the people who tend to seek out a mystical, type of therapist with this whole other what did you didn't call it a near death, you called it a brain surgery that took you into exploring, what do you call it? I'm sorry.
A near death exploration.
Okay. So do you tend to have people who come to see you who are dying, or they're depressed, or who are the people that you're finding who are most likely to come to visit you for treatment?
Most of the folks who come have some interest in the unconscious and in religion, not necessarily organized religion, but what today is called just spirituality. Some people have read my books, and they call wanting to come and do some work on one question or another. But to people who don't necessarily know very much about Jung and haven't read my books and don't even know that I've written any, come just for the same reasons they would go to any other therapist. They're depressed, they're anxious, they lost a loved one, they're in grief. They are going through a life transition, and they don't know how to go from the known of their past to the unknown that's knocking on their door. A lot of folks come because they're wanting to harness their creativity. The unconscious is a great source of creativity, and people are looking for a way to tap into that. I live and I work in Los Angeles and Pasadena, so I have a fair number of people from the entertainment industry, directors, writers, actors. They all want to hone their craft and go deeper with it. And a Jungian analyst can be a good person to go to, because that's what they're interested in too. So it's every kind of problem, and very often I'll work with somebody and recommend them to do an exercise, or we'll try something in the office, and they don't even necessarily know where it comes from or how I came upon it. And that's okay. They're still exploring their work that they need to do.
Well, I personally like your blend of science and spirituality and mysticism and dream work and all of that. What would be a final thing that you would want to leave our listeners with about, uh, the situation in the mental health and field right now? I think there's a lot of people out there struggling right now, and can you offer us a glimmer of hope from your own fantastic voyage that you had?
Well, there's immediately comes to mind two things I could say about that. We spoke a little bit before about the apocalypse motif, or the apocalypse archetype, as it's called in Jungian psychology. The wonderful thing about that feeling that our world is coming to an end, that people are afraid that the economy will crash, that people will not want to go back to work anymore. They'll just want to work at home, and industries will fall apart. We do have serious problems that threaten the survival of our world, because, climate change and the greenhouse effect. Bill Gates just released a book called How to Avoid a Climate Catastrophe, a Climate Accident. These are very real concerns. And people are talking about our ecology going beyond a tipping point and the whole world going into a kind of dark age. Even electricity will be something scarce if things radically change. But the good news here is that every generation, all the way back to the beginning of religious literature, every generation has thought that the end of the world is near. And we're still here. And we always find a way through these problems, whether it was 9/11 or World War II or the Civil War. In the Civil War, a lot of Americans thought that the world was going to come to an end, that America was going to divide into two and would not be able to thrive. So the feeling that the world's in trouble can lead to a lot of pessimism, and I think it's important that people stay in touch with those resources in the psyche that help us contribute to resolving those problems, rather than just fearing them and complaining about them as we do. So I think that's one thing that I think people can walk away with, that I had a near-death exploration, and like most people who have a near-death experience of that kind or another kind will tell you that there's a strong possibility that this is not all that exists, that there are things are not always what they appear to be, and that there are things that exist that don't appear at all. They're in another realm, and they come to us through the unconscious. So what I would like people to walk away with, from the book I wrote and from our conversation today, is an appreciation for the sense of mystery, and that this sense of mystery can be a great source of problem solving and creativity and of wisdom. I think that's how I would wrap it up.
That's awesome. So we're resilient. We've always gotten through everything, and through this, we've gotten through it through our creativity. And I think that's a really awesome place to end this. And people can find you over at michaelgellert.com. Is that? And your new book is coming out soon. Far from This Land, a memoir about evolution, love, and the afterlife. It certainly sounds like an awesome read that all of our people listening are going to want to get a hold of. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. And if I could just add one thing so people know, the book is coming out in a few weeks, but it's already posted on Amazon under the title, and it can be pre-ordered. Thank you very much for today.